The courtroom was silent. The kind of silence that felt heavier than words, heavier than walls, heavier than the judgment that was about to fall upon the lives of two people who had already suffered far too much. At the center of it all sat a little boy, barely 12 years old, his dark brown eyes shining with something far older than his years. He clutched a stack of papers against his chest, as if they were a shield, as if every page carried the strength of 1,000 warriors. The judge, a gray-haired man with glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, looked down at the boy with both disbelief and curiosity. He had seen many things in his decades on the bench. Angry fathers, broken mothers, endless lawyers arguing over tiny details, but never this. "Son," the judge said carefully, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged chamber. "Do you understand where you are? This is a court of law. It is no place of games." The boy's lips trembled for a moment, but then he straightened his shoulders. His voice, though small, carried with a clarity that demanded to be heard. "I know exactly where I am, Your Honor. I am in a place where truth is supposed to matter. And today, I am here to be my mom's lawyer." A collective gasp spread through the courtroom. Whispers erupted from the gallery, and the clerk quickly called for order. But the boy didn't flinch. He kept his eyes locked on the judge, his expression burning with a fire that no child should have had to carry. The judge leaned back in his chair, studying him. "Your mother has no lawyer present. She chose not to be represented. Are you telling me you intend to represent her yourself?" "Yes, sir," the boy answered firmly. "I've read the books. I've studied the case. And nobody is going to fight for my mom the way I will." The judge's gavel struck once. Silence in the court. But inside, his heart was not silent. Something about the boy's tone, something about the courage it took to stand there, unsettled him. From the defense table, the opposing attorney, a tall man in a sharp blue suit, smirked. "Your Honor, this is absurd. The child has no standing. He cannot legally represent anyone, much less in a case of this magnitude." But before the judge could respond, the boy spoke again. His words weren't loud, but they carried weight. "Maybe the law says I can't, but maybe the law forgot people like me and my mom. Maybe the law wasn't written for us. All I'm asking is for you to listen, to hear the truth. Please." The judge froze. Something in that plea, a boy's desperate cry for justice, touched the part of him that still believed law was about more than rules. It was about people. It was about truth. And so, with a deep breath, he said the words that would change everything. "Proceed, young man. Let's hear what you have to say." To understand why that boy stood in court that day, one had to rewind time, back to a little apartment in the poorest part of town, where laughter was rare, but love was strong. His name was Elijah. His mom, Mariah, worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices during the day and waiting tables at night. She came home with aching feet, blistered hands, and the kind of exhaustion that clung to her bones. But no matter how tired she was, she always had a smile for her son. "Come here, Eli," she would whisper, pulling him close. "You're my reason. Don't you ever forget that." Eli's father was gone. He had disappeared when Eli was 5, leaving nothing but broken promises and unpaid bills. Mariah never spoke badly about him, but Eli knew. He knew the man had abandoned them, and that his mother had been carrying the world on her shoulders ever since. Despite the struggle, their little apartment was filled with love. They didn't have much, but they had each other. And to Eli, that was everything. But life had a way of testing even the strongest bonds. One evening, Mariah came home later than usual, her face pale, her hands trembling. She sat Eli down and tried to smile, but her eyes betrayed her fear. "Baby, something happened at work," she whispered. "They're saying I stole money. But I didn't. You know I didn't." Eli's heart sank. "Stole? Mom, that's crazy. You'd never." "I know, but they said they have proof. I don't know how, but they're taking me to court." From that day, everything changed. The landlord started asking questions. The neighbors whispered. The bills piled up higher than ever. And when the notice came in the mail, summoning Mariah to court for charges of theft, it felt like the ground beneath them had cracked wide open. Most kids Eli's age spent their evenings playing video games or riding bikes. But Eli spent his nights at the library. He pored over books about the law, about court cases, about justice. The librarian, an older woman named Mrs. Henderson, would often find him asleep on the desk, his head buried in pages of legal codes. "Sweetheart," she'd whisper, shaking him gently, "why do you study this stuff so much? It's too heavy for a boy your age." But Eli would look up at her with determined eyes. "Because nobody else is going to save my mom. If I don't learn how, she's going to lose everything." Mrs. Henderson's heart ached. She began helping him, pulling out simpler guides, explaining legal terms in plain language, teaching him how to read case documents. And Eli, bright, determined Eli, soaked it all in like a sponge. He began writing notes, preparing arguments, even sketching out what he would say in court. He practiced in front of the mirror, in front of Mrs. Henderson, and even whispered speeches in the quiet of his room when his mom had already gone to bed. To Mariah, he always said the same thing. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll fix this. I promise." She would smile, stroke his cheek, and whisper, "You're just a boy, Eli. You can't carry the whole world on your shoulders." But what she didn't know was, he already was. And so, the day came. The courtroom was filled with strangers, jurors, lawyers, reporters who had caught wind of a struggling mother accused of theft. Some came expecting a sad story. Others came looking for scandal. Nobody expected what they saw. A little boy walking to front of the court, carrying a folder almost bigger than him. His steps were steady, his chin high. When the judge asked, "Where's your mother's lawyer?" and Mariah bowed her head in shame, that's when Eli stood tall and declared, "I'm her lawyer." And though the world laughed, though the attorneys rolled their eyes, though his mother begged him with her eyes to sit down, Eli refused. Because in his heart, he knew the truth. His mom was innocent, and if the world refused to see it, then he would make them. The judge now leaned forward, hands clasped, eyes sharp. "Very well, young man. You've asked to be heard. Begin." And as Eli opened his folder, his small fingers trembling over the papers he had so carefully prepared, the courtroom braced itself. Nobody knew it yet, but what was about to happen would not just be a case. It would be a story of love, of courage, of truth, and above all, a story of a boy who refused to let the world break his mother. The papers in Eli's hands trembled as he opened the folder, not from fear, though fear certainly gnawed at the edges of his courage, but from the sheer weight of the moment. He knew that every eye in the courtroom was on him. He knew that most of them didn't believe in him. But he also knew one other thing. His mom's freedom depended on him standing tall. He cleared his throat. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice quiet but steady. "I know I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a kid. But sometimes kids see things that grown-ups miss. Because we're not thinking about money or winning or pride. We're just thinking about what's right." The room stirred. Some smiled, touched by his words. Others rolled their eyes, impatient for what they thought was a childish stunt. But Eli pressed on. "My mom didn't steal anything. The truth is, somebody wants to make it look like she did. And if you'll let me, I'll show you why." The prosecutor smirked, rising to his feet. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. The boy has no legal standing to present evidence." The judge cut him off. "Sit down, counselor. Let's hear him." The prosecutor's jaw clenched, but he obeyed. Eli held up a sheet of paper. "This is the schedule for my mom's job. The night they said she stole money. She wasn't even on duty when the register went missing. She was working the front, cleaning tables. The register was in the back office, where only managers had access." He walked, slowly, nervously, toward the jury box, handing them copies. "I went to the library and asked Mrs. Henderson to help me check the schedule against the time the cameras showed the money was gone. And guess what? My mom couldn't have been there. She wasn't allowed in the office at that time." A ripple of murmurs spread through the jury. The judge raised an eyebrow, leaning closer. Furthermore, Eli continued, flipping to another page. "There's a witness, a coworker named Sharon. She told me she saw the manager go into the office around the same time. But nobody ever asked her to testify. Why? because they didn't want to know the truth. They just wanted someone to blame. And the easiest person to blame was my mom. The prosecutor shot up again. Objection. This is hearsay. The child cannot introduce unverified testimony. The judge raised a hand. Sustained. The witness in question will need to be summoned. But the point stands that this is a lead worth considering. Eli nodded, his small hands gripping the folder tighter. Thank you, Your Honor. I don't know all the legal words, but I know when something doesn't make sense. If the cameras didn't show my mom in the office, and she wasn't scheduled there, then how could she have stolen the money? Silence fell. The jury members looked at each other, whispering. Even some of the spectators in the back nodded. The boy wasn't speaking like a lawyer, but he was speaking like something far more dangerous. The truth. At the defense table, Mariah's eyes filled with tears. She had begged her son not to do this, begged him not to put himself in the line of fire. She was terrified the court would laugh at him, dismiss him, maybe even punish him for disrupting proceedings. But here he was, her little boy, standing taller than she'd ever seen him, speaking with a conviction that pierced the walls of her fear. She wiped her cheeks, whispering softly, "That's my son, my baby." And for the first time since the nightmare began, a glimmer of hope sparked in her heart. Cracks in the armor. The prosecutor wasn't done. He rose with a scowl. This is absurd. The mother was the last one near the register before it was discovered missing. That is fact. Eli turned, meeting the man's gaze. His small frame looked almost fragile compared to the tall, suited lawyer, but his words cut sharper than any brief. Or maybe that's just what you want people to believe. Did you even look at the security footage? Did you notice that there's a 15-minute gap where the cameras were mysteriously off? Why is nobody talking about that? The prosecutor froze. He hadn't expected the boy to know that. Eli pressed on. I watched those tapes. I made notes, and the only person who had access to turn those cameras off was the manager. So why is my mom the one sitting here, being blamed? Why isn't anyone asking the hard questions about him? The courtroom buzzed. Reporters scribbled furiously. Jurors leaned forward. The judge's eyes narrowed as he turned to the prosecutor. Is this true? Were there missing minutes on the footage? The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. There was a technical error, Your Honor, but it has no bearing. No bearing, the judge thundered. A missing quarter hour during the very window the crime occurred, and you call it no bearing? The color drained from the prosecutor's face. Eli's point had landed harder than any adult's argument could have. Just when the tension seemed unbearable, a voice rang from the back of the courtroom. That boy is telling the truth. All eyes turned. A woman, short, with tired eyes and shaking hands, stood up. She was wearing the same diner uniform that Mariah once wore. It was Sharon, the coworker Eli had mentioned. I was there that night, she said, her voice breaking. I saw the manager. He told me to keep quiet, said if I spoke up, I'd lose my job. But I can't keep quiet anymore. That woman, she pointed to Mariah, is innocent. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel furiously. Order! Order in the court! But no matter how loud he struck, the truth had already broken through. A boy's closing words. When the room calmed, the judge turned to Eli. You may finish, young man. Eli swallowed hard. He looked at his mom, at the jury, at the faces around him. His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. My mom has worked her whole life to give me a chance. She scrubbed floors, carried trays, and gone without sleep just so I could have food on the table. She doesn't have fancy clothes or a big house or even enough money sometimes. But what she does have is honesty, integrity, and love. If you take her away from me, if you send her to jail for something she didn't do, you're not just punishing her, you're punishing me. You're punishing a boy who just wants his mom home. Please, don't let lies and fear win. Let the truth win. He lowered his papers, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Because if justice means anything at all, it should mean protecting the innocent. And my mom is innocent. The room went silent. No one moved. No one breathed. For a moment, it was as if time itself bowed its head to the words of a child who had spoken like a man. The judge sat back in his chair, his fingers steepled, his mind racing. Never in his life had he seen something like this. The law was clear. The boy had no right to act as counsel. And yet, to ignore what it revealed would be a crime against truth itself. He looked at Mariah, then at Eli, then at the jurors who were now whispering fiercely among themselves. Finally, he spoke. This court will take a recess. New evidence has been brought forward that requires review. We will reconvene after lunch. His gavel fell. Court adjourned. As people stood, the buzz of voices filled the room. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered words like hero, genius, and miracle. And in the middle of it all, Eli walked back to his mom. She pulled him into her arms, holding him tighter than ever before. "You did it, baby," she whispered through her tears. "You really did it." But Eli shook his head. "Not yet, Mom. We're not finished. But I promise you we will be." And though he was only 12, though the odds were stacked against him, there was something in his voice that made her believe. For the first time in a long time, she believed. The courtroom emptied into the long marble halls, the echo of footsteps mixing with the low hum of conversations. Some people rushed toward the reporters outside, eager to spill their opinions about the boy lawyer. Others lingered in the corners, whispering about the possibility that an innocent woman had been framed. But Eli didn't hear any of it. He sat on a wooden bench in the hallway, his mother's hand clasped tightly in his. His head leaned against her shoulder, and for a moment, he was just a boy again, tired, scared, and drained. Mariah stroked his hair gently. "You shouldn't have had to do this, Eli. You should be at school, playing basketball, worrying about homework, not fighting battles meant for grown-ups." Eli lifted his head, his eyes fierce despite the exhaustion. "But Mom, if I don't fight, who will? They were ready to put you in jail without even looking at the truth. I couldn't let that happen." Her tears slid down her cheeks, silent and heavy. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that the world didn't work like that sometimes the truth wasn't enough. But as she looked at him, so small, yet carrying so much strength, she couldn't. Instead, she kissed his forehead and whispered, "I'm so proud of you." Meanwhile, in the judge's chambers, the air was heavy. Judge Anderson sat at his desk, his robe draped loosely around his shoulders. Across from him sat the prosecutor, his face pale, his hands fidgeting. "Counselor," the judge said, his tone sharp, "you assured this court the case was airtight, yet a 12-year-old has already exposed discrepancies, missing footage, overlooked witnesses. Do you care to explain this incompetence?" The prosecutor swallowed hard. "Your Honor, with respect, the boy's claims are exaggerated. The mother was near the scene, and the missing footage is nothing more than a malfunction." "Enough." The judge's voice cracked like a whip. If that child had not spoken, would this court ever have heard about Sharon's testimony? About the missing 15 minutes? Answer me honestly. The prosecutor's silence was damning. Judge Anderson leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "Justice is not a game, and I will not allow my courtroom to be used as a stage for cover-ups. I want the manager subpoenaed. Now." The prosecutor stiffened, but there was no escape. "Yes, Your Honor." The recess stretched into the afternoon as subpoenas were issued. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, their microphones thrust toward anyone who would speak. The headline was already writing itself. "Little boy lawyer shakes courtroom. Judge orders new witness." Back at his apartment, the manager, Mr. Dalton, sat sweating in his chair. He had just gotten off the phone with his wife, who told him the news. His secret was unraveling. Dalton had been siphoning money from the diner for months. Small amounts at first, hidden in clever accounting tricks. But that night, he had gotten greedy. He took a larger sum, planning to cover it up later. When the missing cash was discovered sooner than he expected, he panicked. And when suspicion fell on Mariah, he didn't correct it. "She's poor," he muttered to himself. "No one's going to believe her anyway." But he hadn't planned on her son. He hadn't planned on a boy with eyes like fire and a heart too brave for his age. Now, as the knock on his door came, an officer stood with subpoena in hand. Dalton's carefully built wall of lies began to crumble. When court reconvened, the room was packed. Word had spread, and now reporters lined the benches, their cameras flashing even as the bailiff ordered silence. Judge Anderson called the court to order. We will now hear from Mr. Dalton, the manager on duty the night of the alleged theft. Dalton walked stiffly to the witness stand, his suit slightly rumpled, his forehead glistening with sweat. He swore his oath with a trembling hand. The prosecutor began the questioning, his tone unusually cautious. Mr. Dalton, can you confirm that you were present the night the register went missing? Yes, Dalton said, his voice low. And did you see the defendant, Mrs. Mariah Johnson, enter the office where the register was kept? Dalton hesitated. The silence stretched. His eyes darted toward the jury, then the judge, and, unfortunately for him, straight into Eli's steady gaze. That look broke him. I can't say that I did. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. What do you mean you can't say? I mean, I didn't see her. Dalton's voice cracked. I didn't see anyone. Before the prosecutor could recover, Eli stood. Your Honor, he said, his voice respectful but firm. May I ask Mr. Dalton a question? The judge studied him for a long moment, then nodded. One question. Make it count. Eli walked to the front, his small frame barely reaching the witness stand's height. He looked up at Dalton, his eyes steady. Mr. Dalton, if you didn't see my mom, then why did you tell police she was the only one who could have done it? Dalton's mouth opened, then closed. His throat bobbed as he tried to form words. I assumed. You assumed, Eli interrupted, his voice rising with emotion. You assume because she's poor? Because she doesn't have money for a lawyer? Because people wouldn't believe her? The room was electric. Dalton stammered, sweat pouring down his temples. Eli's small hand slammed against the folder he carried. My mom didn't steal, but somebody did, and the cameras were off for 15 minutes that night. You were the only one who could turn them off. So why were they off, Mr. Dalton? The silence that followed was unbearable. Dalton's lips trembled. His eyes darted around, searching for an escape. But there was none. Finally, his shoulders slumped. I made a mistake. The courtroom exploded with gasps and shouts. The judge's gavel struck furiously. Order, order. But the truth was out. Under the pressure of questioning, both in the court and later the police, Dalton cracked completely. He admitted to taking the money, to framing Mariah by omission, to silencing Sharon with threats. I thought I could get away with it, he whispered, his face buried in his hands. I thought no one would believe her word against mine. Judge Anderson's voice rang out, strong and unforgiving. Mr. Dalton, you will face charges for theft, obstruction of justice, and perjury. The gavel struck again. Mrs. Johnson is hereby cleared of all charges. Tears streamed down Mariah's face. She covered her mouth with her hands, shaking with relief. The jury clapped before being hushed, and even some of the officers in the room nodded with quiet approval. But the loudest sound came from Eli, letting out the breath he had been holding since the nightmare began. He turned to his mom, his eyes shining. You're free, Mom, he whispered. You're finally free. She pulled him into her arms, sobbing into his shoulder. No, baby, I'm free because of you. The courtroom was chaos. Reporters scrambled, cameras flashed, and the story of a boy who saved his mother spread like wildfire. Outside, microphones surrounded them. Eli, how did you do it? Mariah, how does it feel to be exonerated? Judge Anderson, what does this mean for the justice system? But Eli ignored the noise. He held his mom's hand and whispered, let's go home. They walked down the courthouse steps together, past the cameras, past the shouting, past the flashing lights. For them, the victory wasn't about headlines or fame. It was about love, about truth, about survival. Yet deep down, Eli knew something had changed. He wasn't just a boy anymore. He had stood against a system that wanted to crush them, and he had won. What he didn't know was that this was only the beginning. The unbelievable part of his story hadn't even started yet. The sky outside the courthouse glowed with the soft gold of late afternoon. The air was cool, almost cleansing, as Mariah and Eli stepped on the sidewalk. The crowd was thick, the cameras relentless. But for the first time in months, the weight pressing down on their shoulders had lifted. Mariah gripped her son's hand tightly. "Eli, I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice still shaky from everything that had just happened. "You saved my life." But Eli only shook his head, his dark eyes shining with quiet determination. "I didn't save you, Mom. The truth did. I just made them listen." Behind them, the courthouse door slammed shut and Judge Anderson emerged. He descended the steps slowly, his gaze fixed on the boy who had turned his courtroom upside down. Reporters rushed toward him, but he raised a hand, silencing them. "Eli," he said, his voice deep and solemn, "I've been on the bench for 30 years. I've seen lawyers with decades of experience who couldn't present a case with as much clarity and heart as you just did. What you did today was extraordinary." Eli shifted nervously, gripping his folder. "I just wanted my mom to be free." The judge nodded. "And you reminded us all what justice is supposed to mean. Not rules, not technicalities, but truth." He paused, then added words that would change Eli's life forever. "I believe you have a gift, and if you're willing, I'd like to help you nurture it." Later that evening, after the chaos of reporters and flashing cameras faded, Judge Anderson visited their small apartment. The furniture was old, the walls a little worn, but the love inside radiated stronger than anything material could. He sat across from them at their little kitchen table, sipping coffee that Mariah nervously offered. "I know life hasn't been easy for you," the judge said softly. "But, Eli, you have something rare. The ability to see past fear, to speak with conviction, and to fight for what's right. Most adults never find that courage. But you have it now." Eli looked down, embarrassed. "I just didn't want to take my mom away. That," the judge said, leaning closer, "is exactly why you're special. The best lawyers, the best judges, the best leaders, they don't fight for themselves. They fight for others." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out an envelope. "I've started a scholarship fund in your name, Eli. It will cover your education all the way to law school, if that's the path you choose. You'll never have to worry about money standing in the way of your future." Mariah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Judge, we could never." "You don't owe me anything," he interrupted gently. "The world owes you, because today you reminded us all why the law matters." Eli's heart raced. Him? A lawyer? It sounded impossible. But then he thought about the courtroom, the way his words had cracked open the truth, the way his mom's eyes had shined with pride. And for the first time, he allowed himself to dream. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Dalton was arrested and charged with theft and fraud. Sharon, the brave co-worker who had spoken up, testified again, ensuring justice was carried through. Mariah returned to work, though not at the diner. Offers poured in from people who had seen the news, and she eventually took a job at a local community center, helping women who had been unfairly treated in the workplace. As for Eli, life changed in ways he never expected. Reporters wanted interviews. Schools wanted him to speak at assemblies. People sent letters, strangers from across the country, telling him how his courage had inspired them. But Eli stayed humble. Every night, he still sat at the kitchen table with his books. Only now, they weren't just school books. They were law books, case studies, stories of great trials. He read them with the same fire he had shown in court. "Why do you keep studying so hard?" Mariah asked one evening, watching him scribble notes. Eli looked up and smiled. "Because one day, I'm not just going to defend you, Mom. I'm going to defend everyone who doesn't have a voice. People like us. People who can't afford lawyers, who don't get heard. I'm going to be their voice." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of hope. Months later, on a rainy spring morning, a letter arrived in the mail. It bore the seal of the city courthouse. Mariah opened it nervously, afraid it was some leftover piece of bad news. But inside was something unexpected. It was an invitation. Eli Johnson. It read, "In recognition of your extraordinary courage in pursuit of justice, the city is awarding you the Medal of Honor for Civil Bravery. You will be the youngest recipient in the city's history." Mariah gasped, clutching the letter to her chest. Eli, do you know what this means? But Eli just grinned. It means they're finally listening. Not to me, but to people like us. The ceremony was held in the grand hall of the courthouse. Judges, lawyers, reporters, and citizens filled the seats. Cameras flashed as the mayor placed a medal around Eli's neck, his voice booming. This young man reminded us that justice belongs to everyone, not just the powerful. Let his courage inspire us to never forget the human heart behind the law. The crowd rose to its feet, applauding. Some even wept. And in the middle of it all, Eli stood, his head held high, not with pride, but with purpose. Because the unbelievable twist was this. A 12-year-old boy who once had nothing, who the world expected to stay silent, had become a symbol of truth. Years later, Eli would look back on that day as the moment everything changed. He would go on to graduate top of his class, to become a lawyer who fought for the forgotten, and eventually, even more unbelievably, to take his place on the very bench where Judge Anderson once sat. But for now, he was still just a boy walking home with his mom, the medal shining against his chest, the future wide open before him. As they climbed the old apartment stairs, Mariah squeezed his hand. "Do you know what I see when I look at you, Eli?" He smiled up at her. "What?" She brushed his hair back, her eyes glowing with pride. "I see a miracle. My miracle." Eli looked down at the medal, then back at his mom. "No, Mom, you're the miracle. Because everything I am is because of you." And with that, mother and son stepped inside, the door closing softly behind them. The world outside buzzed with headlines and praise. But within those four walls, the truth was simple. They had each other. They had love. And no system, no lie, no injustice could ever take that away again. Epilogue. The boy who became a voice. The story of the little boy lawyer traveled far beyond their city. It was told in schools, in churches, in courtrooms. It reminded people that justice wasn't about power or money, but about truth, and that sometimes it takes a child to remind the world of that. And for Eli, it was only the beginning, because he wasn't just a boy who defended his mom. He was a boy who taught the world what justice really looks like. And that was the unbelievable ending.